Russia and Ukraine, Belarus has just made a move that's shaking the geopolitical balance. For months, the war had seemed relatively stable, with both sides locked in a deadly stalemate. But this latest shift by Belarus might open a brand new chapter that no one saw coming. For a long time, Belarus has been walking a thin line. It's a close ally of Russia, but it had avoided getting directly involved in the war. Belarus allowed Russian troops to use its territory early in the invasion, provided logistical support, and let Russia launch missiles from its airspace, but it never fully committed to combat. That line may have just been crossed. Reports are now emerging that Belarus has officially repositioned its troops and military assets near the Ukrainian border, signaling that it could be preparing for direct involvement. Satellite images, military intelligence, and eyewitness accounts suggest that Belarusian forces have begun large-scale exercises in the southern part of the country, not far from Ukraine's northern border. Some sources indicate that these are not just drills but actual mobilizations. Artillery systems, missile launchers, and armored units have reportedly been moved into strategic positions that would allow quick access into northern Ukraine. This action has caught the attention of military analysts worldwide because it could stretch Ukraine's defenses even thinner. Ukraine has been focused primarily on the eastern and southern fronts, where Russia's assaults have been relentless. The potential opening of a northern front by Belarus forces Ukraine to divide its already limited resources. Ukrainian intelligence officials have confirmed that they are closely monitoring Belarusian troop movements and have begun strengthening defensive lines near the border with Belarus. The last time an attack came from the north was during the early days of the war, when Russian forces invaded from Belarusian territory toward Kiev. Ukraine managed to repel that attack, but it came at a heavy cost. This time, the circumstances are different. Belarus's direct involvement would represent a new phase of the war, transforming it from a two-nation conflict into a regional crisis. The political implications are enormous. President Alexander Lukashenko has long been seen as a loyal ally to Vladimir Putin. His country depends heavily on Russian economic and military support, especially after facing widespread Western sanctions and internal opposition following the disputed 2020 election. Many analysts believe Lukashenko's move is not purely military, it's political. By aligning more openly with Russia, Belarus could be trying to secure further guarantees from Moscow, both financially and militarily. It may also be trying to show strength at a time when domestic unrest is simmering under the surface. The Belarusian government has faced increasing dissent, and joining the war could be an attempt to rally nationalist sentiment at home. However, it's a risky gamble. Involving Belarusian forces could draw global condemnation and possibly make Belarus itself a target for Ukrainian counterstrikes. From Moscow's perspective, this development is a welcome relief. Russia's forces are overstretched, suffering heavy losses and struggling with logistics. Having Belarus step in as a secondary front helps relieve pressure and forces Ukraine to fight on multiple sides. If Belarus commits troops, Russia could redirect some of its own units to focus on key strategic areas in the east and south. The Russian military would also gain a larger operational area for launching missiles, drones, and artillery strikes deeper into Ukrainian territory. Ukraine, on the other hand, sees this as a serious threat. President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned that any aggression from Belarus will be met with firm resistance. Ukrainian officials have stated that they are ready for any scenario, but acknowledge that a new northern front would strain their capacity. Ukrainian civilians living near the Belarusian border are being warned to stay alert, and evacuation plans are being reviewed in several northern regions. Western nations are reacting swiftly to the news. NATO members, particularly Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia, countries that border Belarus, are now on high alert. Poland has already increased its military readiness and deployed more forces to its eastern border. The alliance fears that Belarus's involvement could trigger further destabilization across Eastern Europe. NATO has also reiterated its full support for Ukraine and warned Belarus against any direct participation that could expand the war beyond Ukraine's borders. The United States and European Union have condemned the move, calling it an unacceptable escalation. There are talks of new sanctions specifically targeting Belarusian state enterprises and government officials. Diplomatic pressure is mounting, but Belarus's leadership appears undeterred. Lukashenko has stated publicly that Belarus will defend itself against what he describes as Western provocation and Ukrainian threats. Critics argue that this rhetoric mirrors the justifications used by Russia before its invasion of Ukraine, suggesting a coordinated narrative. Militarily, Belarus's involvement may not seem overwhelming at first glance. Its army is smaller compared to Russia's, with limited combat experience. However, even a modest force opening a new front could have an outsized impact. Ukraine's strength lies in its adaptability and morale, but facing simultaneous threats from multiple directions complicates command and logistics. Every new front means more supply lines, more soldiers deployed away from key battlegrounds, and more pressure on already strained resources. Another key concern is missile and drone warfare. Belarus possesses launch systems capable of striking deep into Ukrainian territory, including key cities and infrastructure. Using Belarusian territory as a platform for long-range attacks would give Russia additional reach and flexibility. It would also make it harder for Ukraine to predict and intercept incoming threats, since they could come from multiple angles. There's also a psychological factor. Belarus joining the fight could be intended to send a message to Ukraine and its Western allies that Russia's support network is growing, not shrinking. It reinforces the image of an Eastern Bloc united against Western influence, which Moscow has tried to promote throughout the conflict. It may also be a signal to other nations aligned with Russia, like Iran or North Korea, that the time to stand firm against Western pressure is now. At the same time, Belarus's decision could backfire. The Belarusian economy is already fragile. Increased sanctions and potential isolation from global trade could cripple its industries. Moreover, Belarusian citizens are showing signs of unease. Many Belarusians have no desire to fight in a war that isn't theirs. Some opposition figures have already called for mass protests, warning that Lukashenko is dragging the country into a conflict that could destroy it. If the war turns against Belarus, internal instability could grow, putting Lukashenko's grip on power at risk. Ukraine is not standing still. Its intelligence networks have been quick to adapt, and its allies are providing enhanced surveillance and satellite monitoring of Belarusian movements. Western nations have promised to supply additional air defense systems and early warning technologies to counter potential missile strikes from the north. The Ukrainian army is reinforcing defensive positions near key northern cities like Chernihiv and Rivne, while also preparing mobile response units in case of incursions. Strategically, this moment marks a turning point. For nearly 2 years, the war has revolved around eastern and southern battlefields. The addition of Belarus as an active participant forces everyone, from Kiev to Brussels to Washington, to rethink their strategies. NATO planners must now account for a broader potential battlefield extending along the northern frontier. The United States is likely to increase its support to Ukraine not only in military aid, but also through intelligence sharing, cybersecurity, and economic assistance. The question everyone is asking now is how far Belarus is willing to go. Will it commit ground troops, or is this mostly a show of force to pressure Ukraine and its allies? Lukashenko may hope to gain concessions or deterrence without actually plunging his country into a prolonged war. But the risk is that once mobilization begins, events could spiral beyond his control. If even one Belarusian missile or troop crosses into Ukraine, Kiev is likely to respond forcefully, setting off a chain reaction. This escalation also complicates any diplomatic peace efforts. While some international mediators had been exploring ways to negotiate limited ceasefires or humanitarian corridors, the inclusion of Belarus as a new active player reduces the chances of immediate dialogue. Russia may use Belarus's involvement to push for new conditions or territorial claims, further prolonging the conflict. Looking at the broader geopolitical map, this move tightens the alliance between Moscow and Minsk. Belarus becomes even more dependent on Russian support, both politically and militarily. In return, Russia gains a more secure western flank and expanded access for troop and weapon movement. This could also affect neighboring countries like Poland and Lithuania, who may face increased Russian, Belarusian hybrid operations along their borders, including cyberattacks, propaganda, and refugee weaponization. For Ukraine, the challenge now is resilience. The country has faced countless turning points throughout this war, from the fall of cities to counteroffensives that stunned the world. This moment is another test of endurance and strategy. Ukraine must balance defending its borders with sustaining morale and continuing international support. Each new escalation brings risk, but also renewed attention and aid from allies who recognize the broader threat posed by Russian and Belarusian cooperation. For ordinary people in the region, fear and uncertainty are growing again. Families near the northern border are preparing shelters, gathering supplies, and listening anxiously to news reports. The memories of the early invasion days, sirens, explosions, and mass evacuations are returning. Humanitarian organizations are bracing for potential displacement if fighting resumes near Belarus. In Washington, Brussels, and London, discussions are intensifying about what this means for Europe's future security. Some officials see Belarus's actions as confirmation that this conflict is no longer just about Ukraine. It's about a direct challenge to NATO's stability. Military exercises in Eastern Europe are being expanded, and new deployments are being discussed to deter further escalation. Meanwhile, Moscow is celebrating Belarus's move as a show of unity. Russian state media is portraying it as a step toward protecting the motherland and countering Western aggression. But behind the propaganda, Russia's dependence on Belarus is growing, signaling deeper vulnerability. Moscow needs allies, and Belarus is one of the few willing to take that risk. The coming weeks will reveal how serious this shift truly is. If Belarus follows through with combat actions, we could see a rapid and dangerous escalation. If it stops short and uses this as a bargaining chip, then the crisis may stay contained, though tensions will remain sky high. Either way, the message is clear. The war in Ukraine is entering a new and unpredictable phase. In summary, Belarus's latest actions have altered the strategic map. Its decision to move closer to direct participation has forced Ukraine to reconsider its defense posture and has reignited fears across Europe of a wider conflict. Russia gains temporary advantages, but Belarus risks isolation and internal backlash. The world now watches to see if this bold move will change the war's momentum or simply deepen the chaos. Thank you for watching and staying informed. This is a developing story, and we'll continue to monitor updates as they unfold. Stay tuned, stay aware, and we'll see you in the next video.